Greetings, viewers. In the world marked by geopolitical fluidity and accelerating transition in global energy governance, nuclear power has re entered strategic discourse with renewed complexities, no longer confined to the binaries of deterrence and proliferation. It now straddles the domains of climate policy, energy resilience, and technological sovereignty. For India, this evolving nuclear landscape presents both challenges as well as opportunities to reconcile its long standing strategic doctrine with emerging imperatives of sustainable development and international cooperation. Amid this shift, the questions confronting nuclear strategy today are more layered than before. This interview aims to address how nuclear capability should be positioned in the multipolar world, what frameworks can ensure both safety and scalability, and how the pursuit of energy security intersects with the ethical and political responsibilities of being a nuclear power. And to discuss the same, we have with us Dr. Manpreet Sethi, a distinguished fellow from erstwhile Center for Air Power Studies and now Center for Air and Space Power Studies, who brings with herself decades of research and thoughtful leadership to the conversation. On behalf of the GeoStrata, welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Darshan. Pleasure to be here.
So I'll start with India's target. So India targets 100 gigawatt by 2047. How do you see geopolitical imperatives such as energy security, decarbonization commitments, and strategic autonomy shaping the scale and pace of this nuclear expansion?
So thank you very much, Darshan. That's a great place to start because as you're suggesting, India's energy scenario has some vulnerabilities. Energy security is a very important component of a nation's growth and economic development. Every country targets to have energy security because what you want is secure fuel resources so that you can have as much energy as you desire. But the problem here is that the resources are few and several of the resources have several problems. So one has to choose carefully as to what fuel sources are you going to use for your electricity production, which is the big part of the energy consumption that a country has. So you have in your question mentioned 3 or 4 things. Geopolitical imperatives, which essentially is that the resources that you get should be free of geopolitical encumbrances. As you see in today's environment, the fact that we are getting oil from Russia is caught in geopolitics because even if it's a resource that is available, because of the situation that we are in, the geopolitics that we are in, there are concerns about availability of this resource to us. Similar geopolitical issues were also with West Asia, because when India was drawing a substantive part of its oil imports from Iran, that was subjected to geopolitical issues. So geopolitical imperatives are a very important component of how you decide what your fuel resource should be. The second important thing that you mentioned is energy security. And this I already said, a country must have secure energy sources in order to cut out the possibility of vulnerability, because it should not be that in times of crisis, such a resource becomes unavailable to you. Then you are not secure at the energy level. So energy security is a very important driver. The third thing that you mentioned are decarbonization commitments. Now, in today's time, with climate change having become such an important concern globally, and certainly for developing countries like India, you have to choose sources which would provide you low carbon, so low greenhouse gas emissions, so that environmentally you are having a secure source of energy. So that becomes a driver. And the last one that you mentioned is strategic autonomy, which again is linked with energy security. Your ability to take independent decisions is because you have strategic autonomy when you are not dependent on energy sources. So all of the four things that you mentioned are very important in shaping the energy choices. And for India, since at the present moment, we are getting almost 60 to 70% of our electricity generation from thermal power sources, for which you are dependent on the outside world. So you're subject to geopolitics. And these are high GHG emission sources. So environmentally, they are not the best sources to use. So if you have to make the choice to move away from these thermal sources, then the answer is either in renewable or in nuclear energy. So renewable, India, as you know, has had a very big jump in its electricity production from renewable energy. But the problem with renewable energy is that it is not available all the time. So it is not a base load source of electricity. Though it is a low carbon source of electricity, it is not base load. And that then brings us to nuclear energy, which is a low carbon source, as well as which is a base load source. So therefore, nuclear energy is seen as something that fits all the four parameters that you mentioned. And that's why India's commitment, which has been made this year in the budget when it was announced by the finance minister, is to move to 100 gigawatts by 2047. Currently, we are at less than 9 gigawatts. So it is a big ambition that we have set for ourselves, because 47 is only 2 decades away. So for us to go from 9 gigawatts to 100 gigawatts is not going to be an easy thing, but a certain pathway has been set, by the government. And if everybody is able to pull their weight, we might be able to get to 100 gigawatts by 2047. But it's a huge ambition.
Absolutely, ma'am. Looks like we need a huge nuclear energy transition. And my next question in that direction itself. What are the strategic trade-offs that emerge between flea model deployment of large reactors, such as uh, pressurized heavy water reactors, and the adoption of small modular reactors in light of India's energy transition and risk diversification goals?
Yeah, so you are mentioning two things here. One is the fleet mode construction, which is of large capacity reactors. And the largest capacity reactor that India today has indigenously built is a 700 megawatt reactor, right? We, for a long period of time, were constructing 220 megawatt reactors. Then we transitioned to 540 megawatt reactor, and today we are at 700 megawatt. And these are indigenously designed and constructed reactors. In the outside world, the capacity of the reactors is much more. It is in some cases like 1300 megawatt, it is 1600 megawatt. And the whole idea was that if you can get larger capacity reactors, the jump in the electricity production is that much more rather than smaller reactors, because the time taken is quite a lot in reactor construction. And therefore, uh, for India to have rapid induction of nuclear electricity as part of its energy mix, the desire was to move to higher capacity reactors. And as I said, what the Indian government has provided approval for is 700 megawatt reactors to be constructed in fleet mode. Now, this is essentially giving a kind of predictability to the nuclear industry, that because these will be in fleet mode, they will be one after the other. Construction will take place, and over a period of time, we will see, and according to the government, the ambition or the idea is that every year, one reactor of 700 megawatt should become operational. So this is the fleet mode, and we definitely need this because we need, larger induction of nuclear electricity. The other thing that you mentioned is small modular reactors, which is almost the opposite of what we are talking in terms of larger capacity reactors. So small modular is the idea that any reactor which is less than 300 megawatt is called a small reactor, according to a definition of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this small reactor, when it can be designed in such a manner that it can be built in factories as a module, they become small modular reactors. So I mentioned to you, India built several small reactors of 220 megawatt, but they were not modular reactors because each one was constructed as a project. But if you could build it in the factory as modules, they can be then quickly brought to the site, and it's a situation of plug and play. It's like the washing machine, that several of them get built, and then you just bring one home and you start using it. Some kind of a similar concept has come with the idea of small modular reactors. Now, currently, the only small modular reactors which are operational are in Russia on a barge. So these are the floating nuclear power plants. Uh, Very small nuclear reactors. China claims that it also has a small modular reactor. But besides these two countries, there are several designs on the table of small modular reactors, but none of them have become operational. So what India is now thinking of is what we have started calling the Bharat small reactor, which is the 220 megawatt reactor, if it can be redesigned in a certain way to make it modular, so that you can quickly then set up modules of this reactor. And the benefit of a small modular reactor is essentially that it does not have the long construction period, which is of a traditional reactor. So it can be built quickly. The capital that is needed for construction of this reactor is obviously lesser than in the case of the other, because the biggest criticism of a nuclear power plant is that it's highly capital intensive and that it takes a lot of time. So both of these criticisms are mitigated in the case of small modular reactors. It also gives you the flexibility of where you can place the small modular reactor. Unlike traditional reactors, which must be close to water sites, and there are some siting constraints with those reactors. In the case of small modular reactors, the understanding is they can be closer to populations. You can put them up in remote areas, also in urban areas. You can use them in various ways. I think the biggest benefit that India could get from the small modular reactor is to have it as part of uh, industry which is very energy intensive, like cement production, steel production, aluminum production, where you have these kinds of plants. If you could have an SMR which is providing electricity to them, that would be a very good way of using SMRs. The other use of SMRs could be for repurposing some of our coal-fired plants, because the coal-fired plants must phase out if we have to move towards net zero emissions. And then the infrastructure of the coal-fired plants can be reutilized for small modular reactors. And a third use can be in remote areas. So, in the Siachen or in some of the desert areas where electricity requirements have to be met, it can be through SMRs. So there is no trade-off for India. It is not one versus the other. It is not fleet mode, large capacity, or small reactors. We need both of them. Because of our electricity requirement, we need larger capacity reactors for quick jumps of our electricity production. And at the same time, for the kind of needs that I've just mentioned, we also need small modular reactors. That's a long answer, but I needed to explain both the components because India needs both.
Yes, man, quite comprehensively, enjoyable as well. You mentioned about reactors, and India is quite ambitious as well as we have long-term vision when it comes to reaction. Given India's long-term vision of thorium-based reactors, how realistic is the transition timeline that what geopolitical factors might accelerate or impede the progress through the fast breeder reactor stage towards thorium development?
Yeah, so as you know, India has a three-stage nuclear cycle. Basically, what Homi Bhabha, who was the father of India's nuclear power program, had envisaged in the late 1940s and 50s was that India will transition from the first stage to the second stage to the third stage. The first stage will be pressurized heavy water reactors, which is what we currently are in. The PHWRs in several. Have you lost me, Darshan? Was there a time lag?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. No, I just felt that your image had gone frozen. So whether the internet had become unstable or something.
No
Okay,
worries,
so
ma'am.
let me start my answer again. So as you know, India has a three-stage cycle. Dr. Homi Bhabha, who was the father of India's nuclear power program, had envisaged this in the 1950s, basically saying that the first stage of the program will be PHWRs, which are the pressurized heavy water reactors, and that India will build several of the PHWRs. PHWRs use natural uranium with heavy water, and the byproduct of this is plutonium. So the plutonium then, which is the byproduct or the waste of the first stage, will go into the second stage of the cycle, which will be what you mentioned, the fast breeder reactor. So the fast breeder reactor will breed more of the plutonium, which then in the third stage will be used with thorium and uranium-233 to provide for large-scale utilization of thorium, of which India has plenty of resources. So the idea was that uh, you will transition from a dependency on uranium, of which India does not have too much, and the quality of the uranium also that India has is not of very high quality. So you will transition from this stage into the stage of energy self-sufficiency with the utilization of thorium. So that was his idea. Now, what has happened is we have PHWRs. We've got 25 operational reactors today of the PHWR variety. We have a stockpile of plutonium, which is ready to go into the fast breeder reactors. But the prototype fast breeder reactor is not yet operational. So the first proof of concept that India was doing with the prototype fast breeder reactor is yet to become operational. Um, we've had some breakthroughs in this. So the core loading has already taken place. But because India is perhaps one of the few countries, perhaps the only country today, which is continuing to stay with the idea of fast breeder reactors, because some countries like Japan and France experimented with the idea of fast breeder reactors but gave it up. They did not have the compulsions that India has because they had availability of uranium from the international market. But because India is not a member of the NPT, we were constrained from not being able to access uranium from outside. This situation has changed after the Indo-US nuclear deal was signed in 2008. And today we do have access to uranium from outside. But India is persisting with its three-stage cycle because we want to reach the thorium cycle. And the technological demands are such that you have to transition from one stage to the next to the next. So we are still waiting for our prototype fast breeder reactor to become operational. Once that happens, a series of fast breeder reactors will be set up, and then we will transition to thorium. So when you say in your question that what is a realistic timeline for the transition, well, it is a bit distant. It's not going to happen in the next, I would say, 2 decades. It's going to be more than that if we continue to follow this cycle. But what a possibility that has emerged in recent times, and particularly in the context of the technological breakthroughs that are happening in small modular reactors, is that we might not have to go from one stage to the next, but you might be able to jump to the third stage because technology today is providing the possibility of thorium utilization without having to go through the fast breeder reactor stage. But it is still to be proven. This is still, experimentation, research and development work that is going on. So while we are pinning a lot of hope on that, we'll see in the next few years whether that can fructify and take us to the thorium utilization as quickly as we can. That would be the best for us in terms of energy self-sufficiency.
Definitely, ma'am. Now, whenever we talk about any policy in any democracy, every policy is backed by some kind of legislation. In case of India, we also have, when it comes to nuclear policy, certain legislations. There are primarily two legislation, but we've been talking about amending those legislation. Some of the parts of the legislation have been amended. Yeah, some of them are yet to be amended. How critical are the amendments to the Atomic Energy Act and Civil Liability Act in unlocking private sector investment? And what lessons can India take from countries with mature civil nuclear markets to maintain balance between industry participation and nuclear safety?
So, as you suggest, each country has evolved its own nuclear establishment. Some of them have wholly government-supported nuclear operations and construction, nuclear power programs, and some of them have private participation to a very large extent, like the US. And then there are some which are hybrid, where you have a mix of public and private. Now, up till now, India has been a completely government-controlled nuclear sector. But since our ambition is to rapidly expand our nuclear power program, get to 100 gigawatts by 2047, just by government sponsored nuclear reactors, which is essentially through the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, NPCIL, which has been the constructor and the operator of nuclear reactors in India up till now. It is felt that we might not be able to get to 100 gigawatts. So NPCIL's hands have to be strengthened by the private participation. And that's where the need for amendment has come, because the act that you mentioned, the Atomic Energy Act of 1962, was basically that uh, the government or the public sector will be holding uh, the reins of the nuclear program. But if we want private participation, and particularly foreign private participation, because the government has said that they are interested in getting foreign direct investment in the nuclear sector, then for that, the amendment of the Atomic Energy Act is important. And that is what has been spoken about, that will happen. It was mentioned that it would happen in this monsoon session. I haven't followed whether, it has been put up yet or not. The second act is the CLNDA, or which is the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages Act of 2010. Now, this, once the Indo-US nuclear deal had been, concluded, then the Liability Act became important because we were going to have foreign participation in our nuclear power program. So the Americans, the French, the South Koreans were likely to set up nuclear reactors in India. That was the plan. Unfortunately, the accident at Fukushima happened in 2011. So the Indo-US nuclear deal was concluded in 2008, and we signed a number of MOUs with several countries for setting up nuclear reactors in India. And these were going to be larger capacity reactors, because at that time, India had only 540 megawatt reactors. And we were looking to go to 1,300, 1,500, 1,600 megawatt reactors with the foreign participation. But Fukushima happened, the accident in Japan in the nuclear power plant, because of which there was a lot of dampening of the enthusiasm that the Indo-US nuclear deal had created in India. And unfortunately, none of the imported reactors have yet been able to find their way into India. But in order to enable for that participation to happen, India had enacted the liability law. The liability law basically said that in case of an accident, the operator will be able to go to the supplier to seek liability, to get compensation. And this became a problem because the suppliers or the private industry then became very concerned about the fact that a lifetime liability was being imposed on them, that in case of an accident, the operator will go to them and for the lifetime of the plant. And the lifetime of a nuclear power plant is like 40 years, 60 years. So that was something that made the private industry very uncomfortable. And therefore, there wasn't so much private industry participation, including domestic private industry participation in the Indian nuclear power sector. And therefore, the need has been felt now to amend that legislation in order to put a cap on how much liability can the operator take from the supplier. Uh, so in order to enable private sector participation to rapidly build some of the nuclear power plants, as you mentioned, in fleet mode, because when you're building in fleet mode, then you need more and more private players to be able to provide the components, the equipment. For that reason, and for small modular reactors, where you largely anticipate a lot of smaller startups, etc., who are going to be very interested in this new technology to come in. For all of this, you have to change the legislative environment for India, which is through the change in the liability law as well. So these are the two important legislative amendments which are necessary to enable India to live up to the ambition that we have set for ourselves. In answer to your first question, I said there are many pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that must come together for the nuclear energy mission that has been announced to be set into place. So legislative and regulatory environment are two very important parts of that jigsaw puzzle to make this possible.
Yes, ma'am. And along with private sector, public sector is as much important. The cooperation we have with different countries is also important. In that context itself, especially in the context of global supply chains and geopolitical realignments, how vital is India's engagement with reactor supplying countries such as Russia, United States, France in constructing a diversified and resilient nuclear energy architecture?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, indigenously with our 700 megawatt reactors, we are chugging along. And with the change in the legislative, environment, private sector participation will be enabled, and that's how we plan to go ahead. But again, if we have to jump from 9 gigawatt to 100 gigawatt, then obviously help from the outside is also needed. And that's why, you're talking about imports, nuclear imports for India from some of the countries that you've mentioned. These have been on the anvil. In fact, India is keen to get, larger capacity reactors from France. So in Maharashtra, in a site called Jaitapur, that has been earmarked for the French nuclear reactors. But unfortunately, again, Fukushima, then several changes in the uh, nuclear establishment in France itself. So there was a churning of its private and uh, state issues, and that again slowed down the process. So many factors have come into play as to why the Jaitapur nuclear power plants have not yet become viable. I mean, the negotiations on price are still going on for this, and as you can imagine, with India's unique uh, you know, ability to leverage labor and the cost are much lesser than when you import reactors from outside. So you have to very carefully do the price negotiations to make the electricity, which is produced from there, viable for the Indian consumer. So these negotiations have been um, going on for quite some time. Similarly, with the US, we are keen to have the reactors from there as well. And that industry is looking for markets outside where they find India a very lucrative market to come into. So that is also something which is on the anvil. With the Russians, our nuclear cooperation has been, the fastest and the best up till now, because two of the Kudankulam reactors, which have been built with Russian help, 1,000 megawatt reactor each, are already up and running. Two more are in very high stages of construction and likely to become operational in the next couple of years. And then two more uh, are going to come up at Kudankulam. So you'll have 6 nuclear reactors with Russian help. So India is keen to get the help from the outside for building larger capacity reactors. But again, as I said, for legislative issues, for regulatory issues, for price issues, and for public acceptance of nuclear energy, we are trying to put several things. There are so many moving pieces here that have to come together correctly for all of this vision to be come into being.
Yes, ma'am. You mentioned about public acceptance. There is a lots of skepticism involved, especially among general public, when it comes to nuclear power and nuclear energy, because of the incidents such as Fukushima, as you already mentioned. With the expanding nuclear capacity, what risk mitigation frameworks across technical, institutional, and communicative domains do you think are essential to ensure public trust, secure operations, and resilience against potential sabotage or accidents?
So, Darshan, public acceptance is a very important component of living up to the vision of 100 gigawatt. Because we are a very voluble democracy, as there's a lot of noise about many things. So the outreach from the nuclear establishment to the general public to explain to them what is nuclear energy, why nuclear energy is important for India, and the amount of emphasis that the nuclear establishment, the nuclear industry puts on the concepts of safety and security is extremely important. Uh, the public needs to understand what is the energy mix that India currently has, what are the constraints of that energy mix, what are the vulnerabilities that come with that energy mix, and with that energy mix, where does nuclear energy fit in? So that explanation, plus uh, exposing the public to a nuclear power plant, enabling visits of all kinds of sections of the population to nuclear power plants to get them to understand how safe these are. The kind of nuclear command and control centers that children, youth, uh, ladies, all sections of the population must be exposed to that. Only then will they build a confidence and a trust level that you mentioned, because trust is a very important component here. People need to be explained that, in so many years of nuclear reactor operations across the world and in India, as you would know, India was the first Asian country to start operating a research reactor, the Apsara, in 1954. From then to now, the amount of emphasis that has been put on nuclear safety, transparency on nuclear safety and security that India makes available through the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. I was surprised when I, visit the AERB website and how it is able to document every single aberrant incident that has taken place in a nuclear reactor. So it lets the people know that there was some aberration, but how it was resolved, and it was that it did not become an incident, leave alone an accident. In the world, there have been only 3 major accidents in the nuclear power sector, and the reactors have been operational for such a long period of time. There are 400 plus reactors across the world that are operating. So that's how you will be able to build confidence. The other thing is to make people understand the climate change concerns which are affecting us on a daily basis. I think in every place we are seeing more frequent and more intense uh, environmental incidents taking place. And if we have to live up to the commitment of net zero for our own benefit, because these environmental incidents are affecting us on a daily basis, then we have to look for sources which are reliable, which are baseload, which are environmentally friendly, and nuclear energy is one of them. So making people understand that nuclear energy, it can be a friend for us. Of course, this means that the nuclear establishment must always keep its eye on the ball of nuclear safety and security. There can be no compromise there, because any incident anywhere in the nuclear world reverberates out of proportion. The media is constantly looking for bad stories, and they can put a spin to it, and public acceptance will be affected in a very big way. So the positive stories coming out from nuclear energy, including how nuclear energy is a part of our lives on a daily basis through medicine, diagnostics as well as cancer treatment is with radioactive sources, which is nuclear technology. In our industrial applications, we are using nuclear technology. So people have to be made to understand that they are already absorbing a lot of the nuclear technology in their daily lives. So nuclear reactors for nuclear electricity production will only benefit us and not, it is what is known as a source of electricity, which can be the answer for a lot of challenges that India is currently facing. So projecting it in that manner through a very consistent outreach. As I've said earlier, we have a nuclear energy mission which has been announced by the government, but it'll have to be supplemented with a nuclear energy education mission, outreach to the public. And I'm so glad that you are doing that through a platform like yours, by having these kinds of discussions, which I hope will be able to reach a lot more people, provoke them uh, into studying these issues, analyzing them for themselves, and reaching the right conclusion. So I hope what I've managed to do is to at least provoke them into examining some of these issues for themselves. Don't take anybody's word for it. Do your own analysis, understand what India's challenges are and what possible solutions are, and reach your own conclusion. And I'm sure people will reach the same conclusion, that nuclear energy has to be an important part of this component. So this outreach that you are doing is a very effective way of getting our message across.
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. And thank you for your kind words. And thank you very much for such enhancing and enriching discussion. Hope to have you on board for a few more sessions whenever you are available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darshan. It's been a pleasure.